Plus Savings Bank, you still get personalized customer service.
We have identity safe checking with LifeLock, identity theft protection.
You get personal mortgage lending to fit your needs now and in the future.
You get business banking with the latest technology because saving you time saves you money.
At Council Bluffs Savings Bank, you get people who answer when you call and local employees who are actively involved in our community. Council Bluffs Savings Bank, hometown banking the way it used to be.
So that was about $30,000, but we have $200,000 to spend. But we'll be going forward with bids to remove other sections of the underbrush.
Okay. And the other nice amenities that we're adding, is there going to be a plan to secure those things? Because that's in kind of an isolated area, and I would hate to see all that good investment.
Yeah, that's always the downside of that area, but we'd be looking at some kind of security cameras probably. Some of the things that are in this water park would be subject to vandalism, so we'll be looking at that as part of the project.
Very good. I don't want to see a good project negatively impacted. Great, thank you. By the way, I like the look very much. You're starting to look like the Mr. Dos Equis man. Very nice.
Somebody on city staff, Justin, I think, called him the most interesting park the world's most interesting park superintendent. Anything else on the consent agenda? Anything on the ordinances, or public hearings, I'm sorry. Flip my page.
On public hearings on 5A, Dick, what effect, if any, does a conditional letter of support from the county? I'm unfamiliar with that process.
It really has no impact. It goes on to the city development board, and they make the decision whether or not there needs to be any conditions or anything. Typically on who maintains streets, that's an agreement that the engineering department works out with our public works department after it's already annexed.
Oh, okay.
They come up with the most efficient way to allow for snow removal, who's got the equipment where, and that's generally something that's worked out.
I see. Thank you.
I had a question on that as well. So if the 28E agreement is deemed unnecessary, and I think that was the opinion of Public Works, what they would give their approval only if they sign that, but it's a voluntary annexation, so we don't actually need the supervisor's approval, correct?
We do not need the supervisor's approval. It's the city development board, which is actually a state agency, actually makes the decision. We submit this application to them. They'll have the comment from the county, and then move forward from there.
Okay.
I was wondering if there's opportunity, if there'd be objection, since Mr. Belt is here, if he could possibly answer some questions with respect to the board's position on this.
Could I say something about 2-mile limit agreement?
Sure.
Okay. We do have a 2-mile limit agreement, and I don't think Public Works is saying we should eliminate the 2-mile limit agreement. I think they're saying something else that supports the annexation. But the city has the ability to control subdivision within 2 miles outside of our border. The county has the same control. So if developer X wanted to develop something in the 2-mile limit, they technically have to get approval from both. But many years ago, I shouldn't say many, 10, 15 years ago, we sat down with the county and we had some discussions of areas that the city could extend its water, sewer, street infrastructure that would support subdivisions of urban densities. And those are the ones that we wanted to annex. So what we did is we took the 2-mile limit and we kind of carved it into 2 sections. Those that are to be sewered and watered and built to an urban density. This is that. Therefore, I would say the subdivision is completely consistent with this 2-mile limit agreement. But there are other areas, and most pronounced is north of the community. We do not have the capacity to extend sewer and water without significant cost. Plus, the terrain is very hilly. Even if we could get utilities there, you are not going to get density that is going to be able to pay the freight or pay the cost to get the services there. So those are going to be more estates, and those are kind of the county service areas. So I just want to make that distinction, that there is an agreement, and once they retain a new planning director, we probably will be in discussions with them of, do we keep it, do we amend it, so forth.
Thank you.
Again, I was hoping if we could call up Mr. Belt. I had some questions primarily about traffic patterns and road density, whatnot. That would be acceptable?
Sure.
And as you may know, I'm asking because I'm kind of familiar.
And I'm not an engineer by any means,
Yeah.
and I don't know that our issue is so much with what Don talked about, the agreement with the area, but it also talks in the agreement about leaving parcels or pieces that are, you know, pretty much maybe not usable with the way the rules change in the future on how land pieces are used. There's a strip out there, I don't know, what is it, how long is it? I don't have the annexation map.
Well, the request, I believe, was for 2.3 miles worth of.
No, but I mean the strip of ground, I'm not, and I know what my staff would like to see with that agreement. I think in the future we need to maybe discuss those ingress, egress, roads. I mean, roads don't quit just at the property lines of this development. Those roads continue out, and people use those roads to go other places and go other directions. So I guess that's probably one of the staff's concerns. But there's a strip of ground on, is it Greenview? Okay. Is there an annexation map?
I think what you're referring to is, we didn't annex half the road like we typically would. That was not
Well, and then there's kind of there's nobody got the annexation.
It's a very narrow
It's
strip.
it's 20 feet wide, is that
Yeah,
normally
20
part of the
feet
right
wide.
of
I mean,
way?
what do you,
Is that?
It's in the county though, isn't it?
no, it's, well, if you don't take it in, it's in the county.
Sorry, I didn't want to interrupt Scott, but I just want to explain why we did what we did. Okay. The city has 3 types of annexation. Completely voluntary, which this is. An 80-20 voluntary, where we can take in 20% of an annexation involuntarily with 80% voluntary. Or completely a involuntary, which requires the vote of the people. Now, we tried that in this area, and that failed. It failed. And quite frankly, I'm not pointing the finger at anybody, but 1 out of 5 of those types of annexations the state pass. The annexation law also says we do not create islands. So we have Crystal Lane still as a county subdivision. We have most of Longview as you turn up off of Valley View Drive all the way up to the top of the hill to where it meets Greenview as a county subdivision. If we annexed all the way to the roadway, we have city subdivisions across the way, so we would landlock the parcel. Now, if somebody can come up with a creative way to convince the people on Crystal Lane and Longview to become part of the city because they're surrounded on 98%, 99% as a city, to be a city subdivision, we could get around that. But I know no other way than to do an involuntary annexation of that particular property. The other thing I will tell you is if we do that, there is no sewer. There's limited water. We'll be under the obligation to extend sewer. There is no storm sewer system. The paving is all substandard. These are county subdivisions, not city subdivisions. The county had multiple years to correct this. So that's why we recommended what we did.
Well, and I appreciate that. And as Don knows, and I well know, that those subdivisions were put in probably maybe before we were even put here in Council Bluffs. And that doesn't resolve the problem in the future, how we're going to continue to have this, growth or this partnership and grow in this community. And I got to go look at that map. I guess that piece keeps that Crystal Lane in the county, even though it's not a, what I call an ingress-egress street or anything like that. It's just a strip of ground that's doing it to make them stay county. Is that right? Like a railroad track or something? Okay. Okay, well, I appreciate that, but there's other subdivisions that are in this neighborhood or in those service areas that Don discusses that are going to become an issue, not because there are citizens. There are people that trade in the city and work in the city as well as they are county residents. So, we're going to have to, the rules have changed on the size of lots that you can build on and how they do the septics and wells, and so those people didn't know that when they originally went in there to build and started living there. And I know it's not all the county's fault. I don't think. I don't know. Maybe it's none of the county's fault. So, but I just think going forward that those people are going to be there. They're going to be something we're going to have to deal with. And I guess I'd encourage you, and if you got some great ideas.
Well, Scott, the reason why I wanted you to speak to this. I don't know if you know, but at one time I lived right there at the intersection of Longview and Greenview.
Okay.
And so I got to experience firsthand the volume of traffic that was going out to those subdivisions onto the east. And it was some fairly heavy traffic at times. And now we're going to have Longview being a primary point of ingress and egress out of there. Greenview is going to get even more traffic than what it's receiving now. You have some other roads that people are going to be getting in and out of these subdivisions on that have not been improved. And I thought I saw in your resolution a reference to some sort of traffic study, and I was wondering, what the expectations are.
And I know the resolution. I never saw the traffic study.
Okay.
I tried to get a hold of John today to confirm where those numbers came. I assume they came from your guys' side of the equation, but maybe not. I don't know where those numbers came from, Al. I honestly hate to say that, but I don't. Maybe I'll know the answer for you tomorrow.
Okay.
I didn't put those numbers there, I'll tell you that. But
well, that's the advantage of asking now before the public hearing,
but
so we can get some of that back.
Those numbers for per houses, I guess most of us probably have 2 cars per house, so you can pretty much do the math on the number of houses and cars and stuff. But those standards that talks about sidewalks and the standards that you guys hold to your roads and stuff are probably not quite the standards that even though there's curb and gutter out there, there's no sidewalk on Greenview unless there's going to be one, and then it's not going to really go anywhere because it's going to go into the county or that 20 foot of the county that you got to cross to get back into the city. So.
Well, my recollection is that Longview isn't even it's not a concrete road. It's sealed. Yeah.
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 And I don't know what maybe Greg can give me the history on. Did you put in Franklin and dedicate to us, or did the county put in Franklin and Greenview? Who put those 2 roads in there that are basically they were county roads? I mean, did we do it? I take it. I guess I'll ask my guy. Kind of a weird deal. I drive everywhere.
I thought my memo said, 1999, the county rebuilt a portion of Franklin Avenue and Greenview. And as I recall, we used our map of federal aid, which typically would go to the Council Bluffs, but we joint ventured those 2 projects, and we reconstructed them to urban standards. And so, in effect, there was money allocated to the city that we shared with the county, rebuilt those in anticipation of growth, which is what we're seeing. The city, at some point then, shortly after that, independently, at their own cost, extended Greenview to Valley View. So that portion that goes through, what's the subdivision there? No, I'm talking about the Valley View, or the Greenview extension to Valley View. What is it? Is it Greenview Estates?
Eagle Ridge.
Eagle Ridge, those, that was built by the city.
Don't second guess the appraisal.
Fair Hills.
Fair Hills, yeah.
But one reason why we extended Greenview is to get the traffic off Longview Loop, which really, is not conducive to that. So the actual subdivision that's being proposed here has direct access only to Franklin, which is already improved, and Greenview, which is already improved. There is no direct access to
Greenview's
the...
only improved on one end, if you're going westbound or whatever, you go eastbound on Greenview, it's only improved to a certain, I don't know what your idea of improvement is.
No, it's curb and gutter all the way to State Orchard.
Yep. Then once you get to State Orchard.
Well, city and the county are joint venturing the Beltway project, Eastern Hills Drive. Included in that are several side streets that would tie into that. One of them, which is Greenview, from State Orchard out to L43, is it? So we're partnering with the county to reconstruct to a higher standard that segment of Greenview that Scott's talking about.
Well, and all of that doesn't discount what Don said, is that Longview Loop and Crystal Lane do not want to be annexed, and I was on the council also in that process. It was a several $100,000 expense with a consultant, and a long vicious beating by those people that lived in that area that said, we don't want to pay city taxes.
The 800-foot strip that Scott's talking about is, I think it should be obvious that it's not something that we did to tick the county off. As Don explained, we have no choice. We can't annex that, or we landlock county property.
But that still is contrary to the fact, that's an island parcel. Whatever happened,
Peninsula.
in our agreement, I guess there needs to be an exception to the agreement because it says
Man-made
agreement we're
peninsula.
gonna do it. And it's a peninsula. So any other?
No, that was very, very helpful from everybody.
I'll find out what I can get on the traffic numbers.
Quasi-man-made peninsula, create new classification.
It's hard to hear some of the council.
Yeah, that's
I don't
what,
think they're working very well, are they?
Marcy, yeah, I think we need the volume up.
Not for me.
Oh, really?
It's kind of hard to hear out there, everybody.
that's why I thought they were off.
It just doesn't sound like it's really.
Sounds like they're on just traffic. I think the numbers that I saw the county engineer throw out, I don't dispute, those estimates. From my perspective though, Greenview and Franklin are designed to accommodate those kind of traffic volumes and more. That's why we rebuilt them when we did, because we knew all that area was gonna grow. And so
Rent out a room sometime there on that corner. It's try to sleep there overnight. It's pretty noisy.
Not they're all gonna be bike riders.
The other thing to keep in mind here, even if this annexation isn't approved, and I will disagree a little bit with Dick, I don't think the City Development Board even reviews this. I mean, this is totally voluntary. It goes to the Secretary of State. It's done. A subdivision has been approved for this. They have been authorized to go ahead and prepare construction documents and those types of things. Annexing it just means that 20 houses or 15 houses, whatever the number is, remain in the county. It's really not going to stop this development. I mean, I would say that, so I would assume they would just continue to construct.
And that would in many ways exacerbate the current problem of we have urban areas that really are, for all intents and purposes, part of the city, but technically aren't. Do we want to create more of them?
Yes, and if you have a solution, if you want our office to, pursue an involuntary annexation, it's certainly a possibility. But it does require a full vote of the population. We have debated now and then about whether or not we should pull these residents in this area and say, would you join the city? I mean, the only thing we can do is say, we'll give you a free road, we'll give you free sewer, and we'll give you free taxes for a while. What would compel them to sign? I mean, it would come at a cost. and I will defer to you whether or not that's something we want to incur.
They don't seem too keen on it, and I
Most
know this,
likely.
I'm in that area quite a bit because my mother lives there, and neighbors, yeah, they don't seem keen on it. It's the
And
nicest
we've
way.
also looked at ways, and I've talked with numerous developers in my career here, of how we could incrementally redevelop portions of Longview. So we could bring the city limits up the hill. Maybe some developer can go in there and be able to successfully assemble 2, 3, 4 parcels. And maybe do a small apartment complex or a more denser townhome type development, something similar and akin to Carroll subdivision, where we assisted a subdivision go into an area that's kind of isolated by city subdivision. So that's the only hope that I see, and it will take time.
If that area were included in this, it's significantly over 20%?
Way over 20%.
Way over 20.
Way.
I figured that would have been thought through. I just
Yeah, it would be
ask an
like
obvious question.
90-10 in the opposite direction. So you're not even close to even being able to do it.
But, okay, I knew there were a lot, but I didn't know there were that many up there.
And the worst problem is everything else is developed.
Yeah.
Okay? The parcel west of Franklin and north of Greenview is the only vacant parcel out there of significant size that really can be developed and absorbed in the city. And the rest of the subdivisions are all in the county, for the most part, with the exception of the one subdivision, I think it's Terra Hills,
Yeah.
where the one church is.
Mhm.
With the exception of that, all that stuff between that and 92 is all county. And, just going out and annexing that is not just that easy. And what complicates it is those are subdivisions that don't have dedicated, the county doesn't even own the right of way. They're in easements.
Oh.
Private roads and those.
Yeah, a lot of private roads.
So you have easements for roadways, no storm sewer, no sanitary sewer, no water, and all your drainage is in ditch and everything is overhead. So you'd have to completely reconstruct it, and I don't know how you do that, cost effective.
Other public hearing questions, or other questions on that particular public hearing?
I did have a question on 5B. And that concerns the marketplace expansion. My question is, do we have a commitment from a developer indicating that there's sizable retailers that have committed to going into that development? I'm asking because I know that there's at least 3 different properties there now that have been vacant since the time that the current buildings went in.
Encroaching in these space.
Well, first understand the development agreement as drafted, and I believe as Dick is going to bring forth as an amendment at some point in time, is only based upon performance. So they've got to build it in order to get an incentive. All I can say is Red Legacy Group's a well-established firm. I believe they have the expertise to it. Everything they have said to us is their challenge is to figure out how to finance this. I think they've got a solution, how to finance it in a difficult market. I think they've got a solution to that. I think they have every intent to build all of the inline stores and everything simultaneously, with the exception of the lots that they've sold on 24th Street. And I think, personally, that should happen in 2015.
Okay.
And if it doesn't, they don't get paid.
If I may, on 5C, there really aren't a whole lot of changes. I just wanted to briefly mention them. If you go to the red and green color one, the main one that's stapled, one of the changes on page 3 at the top of it, that subpart 15, the current code, it says that, if your building's been declared historic, if the building official says it is, and that allows you some grace in certain of the rules not applying so strictly to you. But right now, it's whether the building inspector does, and there's no standards whatsoever, and that doesn't, especially, it doesn't offend people who get that designation, but what if your neighbor does and you don't? Well, my building's old, why isn't it historic? Now, this is actually a standard you see across the country, and basically, if it's been declared by the local, state, and national governments to be historic, it is. And that's a pretty good standard, especially if your house, it's a way of telling someone no without it looking like it's totally subjective or you're picking on somebody. On the next page, page 4, a question was raised by the Housing Trust, and I believe that was one that you spoke with, if you wanted to speak to it.
Yeah, there was just some concern because it's getting more and more prevalent to have trusts for homes. So Nate worded the amendment for us that the owner of record, record's family, or a person or persons, either a beneficiary of a trust or a surviving spouse that includes the property in the trust estate. And that's because the way that we define a rental is if it's somebody other than the owner, well, when it's gone into a trust, the person living there is not the owner now. So we tried to amend that to address those concerns.
Yeah, that way they won't get inspected. If you've got the Jones Family Trust, you, Mr. Jones or Mrs. Jones, don't own it. The trust does, so should you get inspected like a rental? No. So we just make that clear. We take out on that page 4 what used to be 38, defining temporary housing, and I think that was a concern of Al's. I could be mistaken as well.
No, that was a concern.
No, excuse me?
That was a landlord concern.
Oh, was it?
And mostly in that and the reason we took it out is it really shouldn't be in this section, but.
Oh, because it's not housing.
Right.
Yeah. Page 5, it's just wherever we call it the property maintenance code, let's call it the Council Bluffs property maintenance code, so there's no doubt what is the default international property maintenance code and what have we actually adopted, what's the law here. So let's call it the Council Bluffs. So just a straightforward change. And then page 6, we changed, there was a lot of discussion, actually quite a bit, a couple dozen hours of discussion about windows. And did you want to speak to that?
When Nate and I worked on trying to address that section, what we thought we were dealing with was mostly issues of light.
Yeah.
And so we had taken out one whole section that we thought pertained to lighting the area and also just trying to make it not so onerous. It seemed that one window should be good. But then when Justin spoke to us about it, and he spoke at the last meeting about this, is that having only one window that opens, the tenants don't know which window that is. If you've been there a few days, you're transient, you don't know which window's going to open. So we tried to address that. And we'd already addressed the glazing, that it had to have a reasonably tight seal. So the addition to this would be any window designed to open must be operable and cannot be painted or nailed shut. So that way, the intent is you can't have all your windows screwed shut except for one in each room because a tenant can't know which one's going to open. And then the other one was openable windows. Every bedroom window shall have at least one window.
Which that one is a lower standard because before the way it was written, in essence, that one window's got to be perfect. And by perfect, I mean in the real world, not, magic perfection. In other words, if it's an old rope window, it perfectly works. It lifts like a feather, which if you have an old house, I dare you to find a window that does that. I've yet to find one, but you would have to do that. And so it's a nice compromise. Instead of saying you've got to have this magical, unattainable window in each bedroom, all the windows that were meant to open should. They don't have to be perfect. They don't have to stay open on their own. It's just if somebody went over there and tried to get out in a fire, they could get that thing open. That's all it says. I don't think we ever intended for people to nail them shut. So it takes account of both truly life safety plus also not making it too unreasonable on landlords. They shouldn't all work like the thing was just built today.
All right, I have a question on that.
Yeah.
So, just for clarity, I understand the windows must be operable, they need to be opened. Are we saying that the bedroom window doesn't need to be opened?
No, it has to open.
It
So
has
says-
to open, because
Yeah.
to me, it seems like we're taking it out of there.
That is a different related section that occurs later. This one's about, if you talk about the egress part of it,
Yes.
the fancy word for getting out in a fire, or.
That's in another section?
It is,
Okay,
we'll
all right,
get to
that's
that
fine.
on the
All right,
next
okay,
page.
all right.
That's a really good question. We
I
have a
just
lot of
just
questions.
panicked, thinking, okay,
That's a
well,
good
then
question.
they're gonna
We did
have a
too,
window
actually.
and they can't get out.
They have
Okay,
to, it
all
has
right.
to, and it says openable windows,
Okay,
everyone.
okay,
Yeah.
gotcha.
We're adopting off that model code. For some reason, they write them in different sections.
All
and
right.
We didn't want to deviate more.
As long as it's in there somewhere.
Yep. Page 7, there was a lot of concern about light. We went back and looked. A lot of this seems to come from the horse and buggy days, or not much thereafter, when, people are still using candles and gas, and I'm not exaggerating. The code, it talks about how much natural light you've got to get into rooms, even if they're interior rooms that don't have windows themselves. We're in a day and age where people have light bulbs, so we took out a lot of the stuff that no longer makes sense. We did keep in, the one thing we kept in was if it's an apartment house or it's a house that's been divided up into apartments and it has common halls and stairways, they have to be lit. We shortened up that section big time because the test in there talked about measuring foot candles, and I don't know how to do that, and I don't imagine many people do. Now it just talks about every 200 square foot, a hallway you've got, it's got to have at least 60 watts of light or equivalent if you're using the modern non-incandescent things. We figured that was important. You shouldn't have to light the hallways. On the next page, we get to Lynn's excellent point. The way it's currently written is not helpful to landlords in the least, and I want to point this out because I don't think it's really. I know we haven't discussed it in a public meeting, but basically we say you've got to have the ability to get out of windows in a fire, and then we have some specific things we add. A is emergency escapes and rescue. Basically, windows can lock or you can have bars on them, but you have to be able to get out of them from the inside. Obviously, you're trying to keep people from the outside getting in. But if they lock, deadbolt, or padlock on both ways, it's a death trap. So that one seems sensible to keep in. The second one, and here's where it's not helpful to landlords as it's currently written, and it's just not reasonable. It says every bedroom's got to have an escape opening according to this life safety code, this International Residence Code. All right. And then it goes on to say, and that's in B in the first sentence. The second sentence says, structures built prior to this ordinance going into effect have to comply with this. So it's not much of an exception, is it? Because it's just saying we mean it. It's not an exception. And then C goes on to say the same thing again. It just gives a date, 1978. It says if it was built prior than that, you still have to comply. So B says, got to be able to get out, we really mean it, and C says, we really, really mean it. So we take out the second sentence of B and all of C because it's redundant. And here's the part I think landlords will like, the first sentence. We add to it a second sentence that we now grant an actual exception. If the building was constructed prior to 1976, that's when the stricter standards for windows came in. And the bedroom was designed as a bedroom, so it's truly a bedroom. We're not talking about bedrooms in the basement because houses in the 19th century, you didn't live in the basement. In fact, mine's still dirt. Mine's never been changed. So if you're going to add a modern bedroom in the basement, it ought to have a modern window, not one of those tiny little ones. I mean, that's just not safe. Those bedrooms were never down there. So you really don't have a reasonable expectation of being able to have a window that tiny because it wasn't really a bedroom. So when you're up in the bedrooms, you can get down to a space, and it's just in here, I believe it's as little as 20 inches wide, if you're granted the exception, 20 inches wide and 24 inches tall. And I checked in my own house. I was challenged because I didn't think mine could meet it, and I was wrong. In my bedrooms, they meet it, more than meet it. And mine comes from an era when the windows are goofiest. I mean, on my main floor, I have some that are 19 inches wide by 6 feet tall that open, which is weird, I know. That era of building, if mine can meet it, any style house in this town from the last 150 years can meet it. So I was wrong on that point.
Yeah, and just to be clear for the landlords, basically what the code says right now is that you have to have 5.7 square feet in an egress window. And it goes on to say, even if it was built without 5.7 windows, you got to put them in. And we kind of thought of that. We went back and looked at the life safety code, which really only applies to multifamily, and looked at what they really meant when they wrote that. and then made an exception that basically said that was done off of a study of how much space do you have to have a fireman get in it. And so it was based off of a 20 by 24 window. You can't be both. So if you have 24 inches tall, it can't be 20 inches wide because that only gets you 3.3 square feet. And so what we did was the life safety code, and actually just this year, and we haven't even adopted this, but this is the 2015 life safety code. In the previous, in the 09, it talks about the authority having jurisdiction can allow those types of windows that, hey, this has always been your escape window, but basically the building official or the fire marshal would have to say, yeah, that's good. So what we did was we went to this life safety code, and it kind of gets into the numbers, and we said, if in the end, if it's wood sashed, if it's a wood window, that a fireman could knock the whole sash out, and it would still get you your 20 by 24, it will be good. So it is a huge, somewhat, and I don't know that many houses are going to really be affected by it, like Nate said, but it is something that we obviously had concerns with right away when we started talking about windows, but I think it is a benefit for the older homes that maybe, and some of the old Victorian homes that have been crossed up, we'll see. Driving around looking, I don't think we're going to have that many issues. So.
I really don't. Right now, they don't have an exception at all. They really don't, which is very unreasonable. And then the next on page 9, if you want to talk about annual versus every other year biennial.
That's been a really sticking point for a lot of the landlords, and I know from the beginning, I'd hope that, we could do it annually by getting it online, but I think that in all fairness, we need to just state that it's going to be annual and do what we have to do to get it online and continue doing this annually as far as taking the payments and the registrations. I can't argue with that point. I still believe that that's reasonable. The landlords have a really good point on that. We need to keep it annual. So that's been changed back to taking the biennial out and making it annually, because it's certainly a reasonable request that should be met.
Starting on page 10, there are several points, and I won't point them out specifically, but there's that H at the top, subpart H up there. Basically, any time that it says the building official, that office, has to generate a list or has to generate anything, any sort of set of standards, they have to have one on at the desk during public hours. My goal is eventually, I hope we have it online, but at the very least, you can't come up with standards and then not tell people what they are. And I'm not saying we're doing that. I just want to make it very clear that we're required. Any standards we've got on anything have to be publicly known. So if they change, people know it, because it's not fair if you don't know what the standards are, especially if you've got some and they've changed and you don't. So, and right now it's not entirely clear whether you'd have them always, and this requires that you do. There was one question of one landlord had raised in particular that seemed eminently reasonable to me. There's nothing in the current rental code that requires a landlord to be notified when a regular routine inspection is going to happen. Now, make no mistake, the building inspector is not breaking down the window to get in, so right now they're calling and arranging in some form or fashion to get in there, but it doesn't require notice be given in a fair way, and now it does. Which it only seems fair. We're not talking emergency or spot, which is truly trying to catch something, quite frankly. If it's a regular inspection, you should be allowed to know so that you can work with it. If that doesn't work, you pick another day. I mean, that's sensible.
Nate,
Yes, sir.
I had a question as to, from the landlords, just how much notice was envisioned, because, these are impacts business.
Indeed. I went back and forth on whether to put a specific number in there, and my concern was if we do that, as opposed to when we tell that this list has to be published of what it is, every time it needed to change even by an hour, we'd have to go 3 ordinance readings. So a number, I think, and certainly nobody's talking about giving them 7 hours notice. I mean, if they did, we'd be right back here and I'd be complaining about it.
And this is probably something more for Mr. Carmichael, just, what does he anticipate would be ordinary business practice in that, just so that the landlords kind of have a ballpark that they can plan their activities against?
That's a fair question. I'm afraid I'd have to defer to Mr. Carmichael, who is out due to a unexpected death in his immediate family, so understandably.
Hey, this would not have any impact when there's a complaint from the tenant that has not been addressed by the landlord?
No.
And he's come to the inspector now to take a look at it?
No, if it's a complaint or emergency, then by its very nature, we don't think you ought to get a heads up if something's bad and the tenant is complaining about it. It ought to be inspected right away because, and then there was some discussion about should the landlord be given a heads up? And at first I thought, well, yeah, why not? And then I thought it through, and what difference does it make? Because if, and I'm not being flip, but let's just say I'm a tenant and I'm making a completely ridiculous fake complaint because I'm about to get kicked out, which I understand happens too often. All right, and so I make this complaint. My landlord gets called up, and they say, "Hey, Nate's made this complaint," and they say, "Nope, everything's fine." We kind of have to inspect it anyway, because now you're not only making us inspect it, but the building department has to decide who's telling the truth, rather than do what their job is, inspecting it. So it doesn't make a bit of difference. And if somebody's filing specious complaints, well, then there's civil action. That's a whole contractual or other matter between them. I don't see how that's the government's place.
I think too that since it's number 3 under A, which A references regular rental inspections, I would hope that would clarify that it's not intended to cover.
Well, and then I look back on 040, and it requires the tenant to make complaints to the landlord prior to us getting involved.
Yeah.
That is true, and I'm sorry. Thank you for correcting me on that. Yes, as to a complaint, they have to complain to the landlord first. Emergency, of course, would be different, and I doubt anyone's going to argue on that one. Thank you for correcting me on that.
Sub 3 again, it uses the term regular rental inspection. So
yeah, the active one we're putting in place, and then on page 11 we've discussed this quite a bit. Section 8. In looking at the matter again, I realize I was mistaken in my interpretation on whether we were preempted, that is, trumped from federal law, which leads to the second question: should we do it or not as a matter of policy? And just so you know briefly, if you're a local public housing authority, a PHA, Council Bluffs has one. They have the 2 towers buildings, among other things, I understand. If they want to deviate from HUD's inspection standards, they have to get a waiver. And I misread that to include local cities as well. And I went back and looked to HUD, and the IRS, believe it or not, has a section on it, because insofar as it affects tax credits being given. And I also looked at how other cities did it. At Des Moines, to look at a large Iowa city, I looked at how Omaha did it. And all of them reference that in Section 8, the local safety code, which is for a different purpose, has to be done too. And again, Section 8 is to help people in the whole scope of their life, and I'm not trying to be flip in the least, but how do you make sure the 4 burners work? How do you make sure the refrigerator has a good seal? That's not really a safety issue. That's a quality of life, helping somebody out who needs a lot of help in their life. And the other thing is for the folks who don't rent Section 8 properties, we've now created 2 classes. They're now an inferior class that gets inspected, and the other folks get a free ride. And the only other thing I'd mention is in Section 8, the reason for that, the reason why, what's the carrot, if you will, for agreeing to this additional inspection and doing a lot more things with the tenant's life, you get guaranteed payment of your rent from the federal government. And of course, our housing code doesn't do anything like that. So 2 different purposes. I know this is an issue that there is quite a bit of concern about, but I did want to, in all fairness, give you my reasoning for changing and believing there ought not to be 2 classes of rentals. Yeah.
Before, I said
Please,
before you go on
please.
this, that was something that even though I'm not in favor of this overall, that was something I was hoping we would keep in. For one thing, because then we aren't requiring double inspections, because they do have some of the same safety. They have the windows have to be operable. They have the smoke alarm requirements. And it's also helping, I felt like it was helping us meet what we're hoping is our goal as far as, you know, making sure all these homes have to be inspected on, you know, every 3 years or whatever it may be. Because they do physically get inspected when they go to do it. So I think that's something we need to consider keeping in there, but that's just my thought on it. I don't know what everybody else.
Some landlords that were unpleased that they were being held to a different standard because they know what the HUD inspection is and they know what they're being held to, and you know, why should they be held to something different? And I had to agree with them, you know, that it does seem a little unfair to them that because they choose not to rent Section 8, that you know, they're not going to get they're going to have probably a more strict, from what I can tell, a more strict inspection than what they would get with the HUD.
It's definitely stricter on the safety things, but it doesn't have all those quality of life things. Like I doubt local landlords, in fact I haven't found one to agree to this that I asked, and if somebody does, I'd love for them to tell me, wants the obligation to tell their tenants how to use the fridge or the stove. I just don't see why we'd be involved in that. So it seems to me you got to pick one or the other. Indeed, with Section 8, if by the way, when a local housing authority wants to get a waiver and do something different, it's all or nothing. The HUD standards say you can't pick and choose. You've got to either go all local or you got to go all Section 8. So, and I think the rationale makes sense. You can't have a little bit of these rules, a little bit of that. Can you imagine how confusing the two books are and which ones correlate and which ones are different? I just don't think that's.
I guess it hasn't been a problem in Iowa City or Ames where they apply HUD standards to Section 8 independently, and of course both have rather sizable rental markets, great numbers of them being college students. But of course the purpose of Section 8 is to help provide housing to the most economically needy individuals and some of our community's most vulnerable, and I'm really concerned here that by placing on additional standards, by subjecting them to another secondary round of inspections, that we are possibly putting that population at risk here and adding additional burden to the building official, who's already said that he can't assure that he's going to be able to meet his numbers or anywhere close to it in that 3-year period.
Well, he said, you know, he had done a study. What he said at the ad hoc committee wasn't that he didn't think he could get anywhere close to it. What he said was
he didn't know.
He didn't know until you get the people hired, and you know, it was based on the studies of what other communities are accomplishing. So it would be foolhardy for him to guarantee anything, but he didn't say that he didn't believe he could do it either. So
well, no, but in fairness, if he does manage to meet his goal, he will be the first of the 10 largest cities in the state to have accomplished that. So
Council Bluffs accomplishes a lot of firsts for the state.
Well, one of the oh, I'm sorry.
Well, I guess I just want to understand though. So Iowa City and Ames are the two cities in Iowa that do exempt Section 8.
correct.
The others don't, or we don't know. We just know they do exempt.
About half of those cities use HUD standards for all of their housing inspections. Do not use the International Property Code at all. So, and I believe that the only other city besides Council Bluffs that does rely on the IPMC is the city of West Des Moines, who applies the 2006 code instead of the 2009 code.
Des Moines does as well, I can vouch for.
Des Moines does.
Des Moines uses the National Property.
And do they exempt Section 8?
No, neither does Omaha. I realize it's a different state law, but if we're talking about federal standards, which is what HUD is, they don't exempt either. Okay. One of the things, you know, about that though, and there have been a lot of comments and concerns raised in emails about, gosh, there's going to be a lot of I told you so's. I would rather run the risk of having to come back next year and say, you know, this program needs another $5 a unit per year than right now. The original proposal, as prepared by staff, was to go from 15 to 50. And there was a lot of concern, reasonable, legitimate concern, that's a heck of a raise. And then we worked really hard, it was primarily Sharon's doing, to get that down as much we could. Cut it back to the bones where it could reasonably do it, but there's no frills. And they got it down to 35. If it can't be done, I suppose the alternative is, if we made it $100, let's pick a ridiculous number, $100, well, as far as you can guarantee anything in this world, that probably does. But is that reasonable to start with? Is that fair to landlords? No, so we're trying to find that balance, and I appreciate maybe it can't be done, but I'd rather start lower than charge and make a profit and cause people's bottom lines to hurt worse. But it's a
And
dilemma.
we could say the same thing though with leaving Section 8 in for now, seeing how the program goes. If it seems like we really are getting plenty, then we could go in and say, okay, we're not gonna exempt Section 8 anymore.
Well,
It would give
So
us-
we would only be exempting section, if you do that though, what it says is we're only exempting it for our convenience, not because we believe it should or shouldn't be inspected.
When I'm saying
And-
I believe it's because I think it's already been inspected, it's passed. I mean, that's but I'm just saying as a secondary reason for it is also that it does help ensure that we can then inspect those ones that are not getting any inspection at all, versus these at least are getting inspected.
I'm sorry.
No, you're good.
I've taken a look at the actual standards used by our local housing authority, and it's not my intent to malign, but the HUD standards require conformance to the local health and safety standards, and I can't find in any forms that they actually do that. And in talking to people, including some landlords, were quite frank with me and said they liked that standard because they don't enforce that part of it. I don't know if that's true, but from looking at the forums and talking to tenants and landlords, I hear that a lot, and so I have a concern if we're creating two classes of citizens. If you're crudely put, and I mean no disrespect, if you're really poor, you don't get the same safety standards as somebody who's paying full freight for the rent. And I just think safety ought not to matter how much money you've got.
Just if I can add my 2 cents on this from the staff, and I mean, the discussion we had this last week is probably a perfect example of the two differences. I mean, the housing quality standard is not a life safety standard. It's not really a minimum building standard. It's a housing placement standard. It's, does this house work for this family? In the discussion we had over the windows, that would never have come to tuition if we were talking HQS standard. I mean,
well, if I may add,
this was a great discussion about, you know, do we get rid of a window? Do we let people fix 3 windows that look identical? And I don't know that that's, at least from my standpoint as your fire chief, I don't know if it's a good idea to create 2 separate ones. The majority, and I guess, I don't know if the majority of HUD or of the Section 8, are they multifamily? I don't know what the.
I don't think so. I think they're more
Single?
It's single and it's
Both.
family, yeah.
I just don't know that you want to get into 2 different standards on somebody's safety, to be honest with you. I don't know that I've read through the housing quality standard. I don't know. I think this isn't the IPMC that we're using. This is the Council Bluffs property maintenance standard. We have completely tweaked this, to be honest with you, in the benefit of the landlords.
over 24 changes.
Yeah.
All but that
And
one's their
to
benefit.
try to make it work for everybody.
Yeah.
And I don't know that it's worth separating it out and saying, well, you know, these people over here get to live by this standard and these set of rules, and everyone else has to live by. I think it's one standard. If we're doing something that's right, it should apply to everybody. And I think we're doing something that's right. I think if you look at all the changes, how they're put in there, I think we've come some distance. We are, I guarantee you, in the next 10 years, somebody's life will be saved because we did some of these things. Because if you drive around town and looked at, maybe there are windows that are affixed. We don't know. You know, it's only a matter of time. The worst fire in the history of this city for lives was an old chopped up house. And at least maybe we're going to do and benefit some of those people that really don't have a voice. So I would, just from my standpoint, I wish we wouldn't separate them out.
I think, you know, this is one of those issues that you probably, whichever way you go on it, you're gonna have one section of people are gonna be mad. I'm gonna have landlords mad that they're being held to a different standard. If we leave this in and don't inspect on Section 8, you can't, this is one we're not gonna make everybody happy. We're probably gonna have a split right down the middle between the landlords who do rent Section 8 and the ones that don't. I guess I would say that if you rent Section 8, that's a choice you've made, that you want to rent Section 8 because 1, you want to provide that housing, and 2, you want that guaranteed rent payment. There's nobody making you rent Section 8. That's an option and that's a choice. So that additional inspection is a choice made by the landlord by choosing to rent in that manner. And I don't believe that that's wrong to rent that. I'm just saying this covers everybody. Section 8 is an option. That's an option a landlord makes and chooses, is to rent Section 8, and so you're choosing another inspection when you do that. This isn't choosing another inspection. This is an inspection that applies to everybody.
And just 2 points. The first is, if we go with the HUD standards, it requires the windows to be in, quote, proper working order, unquote, which means if you have a chopped up old Victorian, you're going to have to learn to re-rope them because a stick in the window is not good enough under that code. If properly enforced, which our city staff would, whether HUD's doing it, Section 8's doing it themselves or not, I guarantee you we would. Do you really want to have, they should open, both the top sash should lower down too. That, you know, when you see windows, the modern ones where the top storm comes out, actually the old ones do that too. It's just over the years they've been stained and painted shut, every single one. So those would have to work too. And that's creating a class between, I can't imagine any residences, I know my own wouldn't fit perfect operating and re-roping and the top sash is all working. Do I make landlords held to that? You know, that just doesn't, that's not reasonable.
I guess I completely understand the point that the decision whether or not to offer Section 8 housing is a business decision on the part of the landlords or the group that's offering the property for rent. I guess my real concern here is for the tenants, because obviously if they're on Section 8 to begin with, they have very little margin in their budgets, if any, and I'm really concerned about what impact this would have upon them, not only just with regard to fees, but also maintenance costs. But I do appreciate you mentioning the fact about fees here just a few moments ago, and that helped to jog my memory. Dick, I sent you some emails, a number of emails as a matter of fact. Were you able to find any ordinances or an ordinance that set out the fee
Here is
structure?
what Steve is proposing, and it's, our fees are actually adopted by resolution for this type.
So there is no current ordinance that covers the fee structure?
There should be a schedule of fees in the clerk's office, and there is a resolution.
There is.
Is there an ordinance that covers the fee structure?
No.
There's an ordinance that says we cover it by resolution. Yes.
Steve gave this to us last time. We got this last time, Al, did you not get it?
Yes, no.
This is something that he's gonna propose to us as a resolution.
I understand that. My question was very specific, whether or not we had a current ordinance that set out the fee structure.
All our
Simple as
fees are
that.
set by resolution, are they not?
Except for a couple that are called out in that one code section dealing with that. And this would, by that code section, would be by resolution.
Okay, I'm just looking for clarification on that.
Just one more point on that. You know, we're talking about an additional $1.20 some per unit per month. And as I fully suspect, and don't blame a business person with a relatively small margin, that's going to get passed through. But $1.20 something a month so you don't burn alive is not, you know, it's a cup of coffee. Actually, it's much less, unfortunately, than a cup of coffee, unless you're cheap like me. But on Section 8, you should have the same safety as everyone else, so I have to echo the fire chief.
Did I understand, Councilman Ringenberg, that if this Section 8 inspections were to come out where we wouldn't cover those, that then you would say that they wouldn't pay the registration fees?
No, it was an independent question.
Oh, okay, I was confused, because I thought, that's definitely not gonna.
Because they still pay they pay the registration fee regardless.
Regardless, yeah, I just want to make sure I understood that, that nobody thought that the registration fee was tied to whether you're inspected.
No, Nate just simply jogged my memory when he was talking about fees.
You know, and that was a question, by the way, some folks got. It's not an inspection fee, it's a registration fee, because even if we kept the exemption in, it would only exempt residential rentals from regular inspections. You still would be subject to emergency inspections, you would still be subject to spot inspections, you would still have to register as a known rental, which, by the way, the list will now be available so tenants can come in and check. I hope we do it online sooner rather than later, where you can look, I'm looking to rent here, is this place legit, have they registered? Because if a place isn't following that relatively small thing, they're probably not following the smoke detectors or wiring codes. So that lets people be a smarter consumer. And so that gets added, and again, for about $1.20 something a month. Oh, just sorry, one more thing. If it leads to a lot of repairs, there's only two possible. If now going to inspections leads to a lot of repairs, especially under Section 8, it leads to two things. One is, and I have no doubt this is true, there are a lot of people in good faith who filled out the self-inspection form who said things were okay, and they weren't. They weren't lying. Lying would be intentional. But still, those things need to be brought up to safety codes. And then I have no doubt, I'm afraid to say, that there's a minority of folks who are lying. And if they're going to lie on that form, goodness knows what else they're cutting corners on that's behind the walls that'll kill a tenant. And again, that's a small minority, but we've had enough problems. And the whole purpose of this code is for the public safety. It's not just the people in that building, but it's the people 15, 20 feet away in the next wood building that's 120 years old. It's about their safety too. It should count just as much as the landlords. As to remainder of changes, that may be in mine and Sharon's. And
No,
it
it's
is.
just the hierarchy would be,
Oh, excuse me.
the list would be on file in the building office, and again, not only on file, but I would hope online at some point. And then we've got
Mr.
Colonel.
Al, he's got his amendments. You want to speak to them? And I know I didn't give you enough time to look at I had very minor changes. I thought
No,
you had very helpful amendments.
No, I'm perfectly happy with the changes that you've made to those. So I'm happy just to incorporate my amendments into your set of amendments. And we can just take that all as one. The key change that I wanted to make in there concerned placarding, and there is a concern as to the circumstances under which a property would be placarded for violations, and Mr. Carmichael indicated that the only circumstances under which he felt that placarding was appropriate was in the case of a legitimate safety concern, which is quite understandable. So I wanted to clean up that section to take out any implication that we would be placarding for other IPMC concerns. Of course, the landlord can still be told to make improvements, make changes, but that wouldn't be a reason to placard the property. The other thing was to maintain the city's ability to use 657A when we discover that we have a problem landlord and problem house that's no longer being occupied, it's been abandoned. We can't do anything with the property because the owner's unresponsive. Obviously, the city has to do something. The old provision in there referenced Iowa Code Section 364, and that provided an entirely different rationale for condemnation, which was not really appropriate to any health and safety standards. So I appreciate those changes being made.
Thank you. I didn't catch that one. That's a really significant change in favor of reasonableness. And the other one, I just want to acknowledge, I missed from the last meeting that we had, I had remembered that we had changed it from any rubbish to significant rubbish, but I had forgotten, quite frankly, that we had changed it regarding pest infestation from any bugs to significant. And so I'm glad you caught that, because that certainly wasn't intentional. So thank you.
Yeah, I appreciate the amendments. I know that the one regarding placarding came up at the ad hoc meeting, so it needed to be done, and definitely good work on getting that in there. And the infestation, yeah, that definitely shouldn't, that should be in there. That was just missed. I actually had to go back and watch the study session, because as we went back and forth, we went from infestation to rubbish and didn't clarify, but I think the intent was obvious. So thank you for bringing that forward.
Significant the right word?
Well, I didn't want to change it.
We had that discussion.
Better than excessive.
We talked about the difference between excessive and significant. Something can be really significant but not be excessive. So significant seems a nice Goldilocks compromise between anything and it's got to be the worst thing you've ever seen on the face of the earth.
Right, because that was Councilman Ringenberg's concern, is does one fly constitute an infestation? So that was what that kind of the consensus was last time, that we could all live with significant.
I'd have to get rid of my dog. That was my concern.
Fair enough. And the other thing was, is, a lot of these, we did, among the different people we talked to, we did talk to the building, to Steve on that one. And he says that's how it's enforced anyway, so let's say what we mean. But I appreciate that. That is a concern, but I think we've all said now what it means, reasonableness.
That was one that was, I didn't have a problem.
No.
Going with the significant. But so, yeah, I appreciate Councilman Ringenberg's additions this afternoon, because I know that from the beginning, he had said he was gonna be in favor of this as long as we could get it in a manner that wasn't too onerous. And I think, boy, I'll tell you, between the amendments he's brought, the amendments we've brought, and doing what we could to address the concerns of the landlords, which I think were pretty much every one of the concerns at this point has been addressed. I look forward to seeing the support when we're ready to vote on this.
Other questions, concerns, or comments on this particular issue? Anything else on the public hearings? Anything on ordinance for third consideration?
I just want to clarify on 6C, when I made the motion for 150, I intended that to be everything, inclusive.
I think that's
not how it was interpreted.
Right, but that was my intent, so I want to make sure whatever we do.
with all the equipment on the
Yes,
roof.
yeah,
All which had
everything.
to be 150 or less.
Yes, that was my intent. They asked for 133, and I went to 150 to include everything.
So that it'd be clear as opposed to, we don't kind of know where it'll end
Right.
up. I see.
Well, it could be 133 with a
With
40-foot
20 feet,
tower on
right,
top of
right,
it.
and I
That's
didn't
a
want to
good
see
point.
that.
That's a
Yeah.
good point.
So I guess I need to clarify that.
That was my understanding. I don't know if
Well, that's kind of what I was hearing as well.
That it was 150 with everything.
The way the
Yeah.
code is structured and the way the amendment was structured, there was, I think what was being brought forward was 135 foot, not including anything on top of the building. The building.
Right, and I pointed that out, that 133.9 was what he was asking for, and I wanted to see 150, that's it, max. So
they talked about the intent of the planning commission, and I think Don alluded to the fact that they didn't know what the equipment on the roof would add to the height, and so rather than try to delineate that, they said 150 foot or less.
for everything,
For,
Yeah.
the highest point of the building, or the highest point of the,
antenna or whatever it is, yeah. So I guess I just want to make sure that I clarify that today.
Yeah, I would recommend that we make a motion tonight to amend that, because that's not the way it got into the record.
And the engineers here for that project, and that's gonna work within, that was your understanding too, so we have, okay.
Yeah. Okay, yeah, because I specifically called Dick and asked him that, and he said, no, that's not what I did. I'm like, well, that's what I intended to do. So,
Tonight, then we finalize it, that won't mess anything up.
No. As long as they're agreeable to it, that's technically be more restrictive.
Yeah.
I'd be a little hesitant, but since the person making the request is here, he says it's acceptable, and is actually within, his request was actually for the 135 foot.
Right.
So, a little less, I guess. So, it should not be an issue.
okay. Thank you.
other questions on the ordinances under third? Anything on the resolutions?
I have something on 7E, unless someone has something before that.
I did, but it makes no difference. We can go
Okay.
out of order.
7E, I would like to get an understanding of the cost to the taxpayers of the overtime that we
Cost
pay.
savings, is that?
Savings, cost savings, yes, of the overtime paid, that we pay versus 7 employees and the cost of their benefits, pensions, et cetera, et cetera. I don't think the savings was clarified in there.
No, it probably wasn't.
Okay.
And
It's pretty hard, I mean,
it's
it's
very-
a movable feast, and it's.
I'll give you the number on the lowest end. The most
Okay.
conservative number would
That'd
be
be good.
$20 a day per vacancy. So if we continue to pay overtime to cover vacancies, and just to give you a little background, last year we averaged about 4.5 vacancies a day. There's 30 personnel on shift, assigned to a shift. There's a minimum manning of 28. So at anything over 4, it's really 5, because you can't get a half of a guy, right? So technically what we do is we cover 2 vacancies with personnel that are on, since there's a minimum manning 28, we have 30 assigned, 2 get covered. But we're averaging 5. So 3 positions a day are being covered with overtime, on average. And this is looking at the last 2 years. Now that vacancy rate's come down some this year. I think it was 4. I think where I put it on here.
Still
4.15. It's still 5. Even if it's a tenth over, it's still 5.
Right.
So what, if you figure it at the lowest rate, and that would be at the, let's say the average firefighter overtime rate, it's going to be about $19.10 savings. I believe that's what the number was. $19.01
A day that we save by doing
per
that.
vacancy per day. So it'd be times 3 on an average day. So throughout the year, it's in, it's 20,000. It's not huge money.
Okay.
And what we,
This has been going on for a
in
couple of years.
2002, when they reduced the force and they said we're going to try and cover the overtime, they budgeted 500,000.
And it's never went up.
And what did we spend last year? Almost 750,000.
Yeah.
Correct. 746, 909.
Yeah.
I think this, Al kind of alluded to this question way back on day one when he showed up. And it's tough to tell because a firefighter may have been here for 15 years and he's really getting some overtime versus
And understand that it's not always a firefighter getting paid to cover a firefighter's slot. If no firefighter's available, we go up the list. Now it's pretty much the engineers and the captains, they're all topped out on their salaries. They pretty much have to have, other engineers have to have 2 years on the job at least to take the test. A captain has to have 6. So you're getting the upper echelon of pay. And just for instance, on a captain overtime rate, it's $913.20 a day compared to a firefighter of $737.95 for a new firefighter. So it's hundreds of dollars of difference if a captain has to cover a firefighter. The key to the whole deal is we're not going to be covering all of our vacancies with these personnel, and that's probably not really what you want to do because there's going to be days that nobody's gone and we'll put another resource into service or we'll add to what we're doing already. So you kind of got to figure out happy medium, but most importantly, we got to get to a real number because every year we've thrown 510,000 at it, and in the last 2 or 3 years we've blown it out of the water. And so it's kind of hard to track where we're at. We're trying to figure out, and then you got to look at what's it do to injuries. There's a ton of studies out there that say the more overtime an employee works, the more likely they are to be injured.
Sure.
And so, and morale, and just in the summers, literally, there are firemen that are on the overtime list that work 36 hours overtime every 4 days off. So,
and it is, in addition to physical stress, it's a job of mental stress. You,
For sure.
on the ambulance, see some pretty horrific stuff that you need time to unwind.
Yeah, that's what's gonna be my question, is not just the financial saving, but the savings to the guys and the issue of having to find all those subs all the time has to be somewhat, I'm sure there's been times where you just can't find.
Correct, there
and
is.
then you don't have enough to be a certain unit in service or an engine in service.
Definitely.
And that's,
it takes hours a day in the morning. Usually I'd say, when I was assistant chief, we probably spent 45 minutes to an hour if it was an easy day of calling overtime because there's a specific way you have to do it. And getting people in the heat of the summer is not easy. They get tired of working and they quit answering their phones. They run out of the station before you can catch them. So, what we're asking is that we experiment with this. We thought about should we cover them all? Should we do it there? It's kind of, let's look and see what this does to the picture. Is this saving us money? And then we'll go from there in the future. The only addition to that is the inspector in the fire marshal's office has long been needed. And when I talked to the mayor about it, I said, if I don't, I'm going to be coming to you to do something. Our inspectors, there's 3 down there. There's really only 1 inspector a day doing inspections, and it's hard to keep up. You got to think, we pretty much could have an employee at one of our job sites daily. Literally, that's how much we go down south. So, and the fact that they cover about 100 to 150 fire investigations a year where they're responsible for determining the cause, and and when you deal with arson and those types of things, sometimes those are a ways out. It takes time to get all the documents in, and it's a workload, not including, you know, smoke detector classes that we do for private business at no charge. We do those guys do after school programs. They do the juvenile fire setter program. We use them as instructors sometimes because their knowledge of the fire service is kind of a different picture than what the average fireman gets. So sometimes it's good for them to go out with an inspector and say, man, that's what that looks like. The workload is very high with very few people, and it's tough to divide up the labor. There really needs to be somebody that's kind of dedicated that his job, and he's supposed to be really good at fire investigations because it's criminal law. It's a lot different than inspections and codes. It's a different type of job, different type of personality. Then we need some guys that are code geeks, and I got to find somebody to replace Larry in a couple years.
So, speaking of which, I was going to ask you about, not specifically about you, Larry, but I may have asked you this once before. You know, what's the general spread in time in the department? In other words, do you have what you think is the right amount of mix of senior, mid-grade, and junior personnel? Because what I see is if we're adding some slots here, that's going to let you bring in more junior personnel, which in the long term, that's a very good thing because then you're going to be building that experience.
You know, in general, I think in the early 2000s, we might have lost a generation of firemen. Wow. Somewhere, I would say. We didn't lose them all. We were losing some personnel to Omaha. That's completely ceased for the most part. You know, we just gave a test, and I can't even tell you how many professional firemen from other departments want to come here and work now. So it's a pretty good stretch. The problem is just getting the succession training in. And when you got a guy that has all this knowledge, especially in Larry's job, because I always tell people Larry's job's probably the toughest job in the fire department. Not real high risk, but it's a job where it takes a ton of knowledge, and if you mess something up, boy, you're going to live with it for a building's life, or you know, or it costs a lot of people money in the end, and we don't want to do that. We want to be upfront and interpret the code the way it's supposed to be interpreted. So he's a tough guy to replace. Looking forward, and as we go, and this is something Matt and I will have to talk about, is, you know, we're one down right now. We're going to lose 2 assistant chiefs in the spring. I have one individual that's going on a year military leave come June. I got probably 2 or 3 guys that can go at any time. And I've got 1 or 2 that are on long-term injuries. So we're kind of looking at what is the real number to hire. You know, the authorized strength is one thing, but we got to figure out the cheapest way and most economical way to get them through a training process. And it's not something you want to do with 1 or 2 if you screw up your number. You want to do it with an even number, preferably 8 to 12, so that the training goes good. Because we do all the training in-house. And so that's something we're going to have to work through on what exactly is the number that we're going to hire.
And then budgeting for overtime this year?
It's reduced. Art reduced it before he left, and I haven't seen the final number. It's going to be reduced some.
So it's reduced based on the new hires, though, right?
Correct, because really the 6 is in the budget per se. It doesn't. If we ran this thing forward, even this year, right now, I could probably hire the 6 and have no budget impact. I might even save some money. You know, if we had them, because it's cheaper.
Right.
Obviously, the inspector costs money, so you're looking at probably roughly $75,000 plus benefits, depending on who that is. You know, I mean, right now in the fire marshal's office, we have 2 captains and an engineer. We always forecast it as a captain position. We don't always put a captain in there. We try to find somebody that wants to do it somewhat long term because it's a little bit of a different job, and somebody who's going to be really good at it and maybe has some background in construction. So we don't know that it's going to be a firefighter. It's put in the budget, or a captain. We don't know that, but it's put in the budget as a captain, even though it may be a firefighter. So.
It sounds like you've done as well you could for as long as you could with trying to bridge the gap with overtime, but it no longer makes financial sense and people are tired.
Yeah,
so
and I think
you're being a good steward of the money.
Yeah, at one time it probably was cheaper. Sure. At the time in the early 2000s, healthcare was going through the roof. Our pension rates were high. Yeah. We're kind of on the downward side of the pension right now. It's going to probably continue to come down. And I think healthcare is at least forecastable.
Wow.
And so, and after tracking it for a couple of years, we're just figuring out at the lowest end of it, it really is
Sure.
no impact.
But it's important to know so that we can answer
Definitely.
questions when asked.
Definitely.
Because I know overtime is very, very expensive.
Fair. Anything else?
Thank you.
Thanks, Jesse.
Oh, you had one on,
On 7C, on the emergency sewer project, and is Matt still here? I was just going to ask, is that particular project, I was locating that, and it looked like it was right up against some of the interstate improvements, and I was wondering if there had been some sort of study or impact, whether or not those improvements may have been part of the problem down there? Or?
It's hard to say. I would guess it's more likely it's residual from the 2011 flood event than the interstate work, but it's broken. That's all I can tell you today. The cause is it's like an airplane crash. All you have is broken pieces left. It's very difficult, especially on something not as technical as a sewer pipe,
Yeah.
to determine what the exact cause of that broken pipe is. You're right. It's located just north of the animal shelter, just for reference for everybody. We discovered it because there was a crater on the surface, but the actual pipe is 25 feet in the ground, and we stuck a guy down there to look. We put a camera in there. We did whatever investigation we could, but what we could tell is it was not working as it sits today.
I was just kind of curious because we've had other homeowners down there in that area complain about a world of drainage problems since that interstate project began. And so I just became curious as to whether or not that could have exacerbated the problem, who knows, all the vibrations, worse than fracking, But
Right.
Even if you had some sort of reasonable expectation that it was indeed those improvements, good luck at working with the IDOT and working something out on that. But
I suspect that would be a tough negotiation.
I suspect so. Okay, just curious. Thank you.
other resolution questions? Anything on the agenda anyone missed? If not, I believe we have executive session.
Motion to go into executive session.
This is,
At Council Plus Savings Bank, you still get personalized customer service.
We have identity safe checking with LifeLock, identity theft protection.
You get personal mortgage lending to fit your needs now and in the future.
You get business banking with the latest technology because saving you time saves you money.
At Council Bluffs Savings Bank, you get people who answer when you call and local employees who are actively involved in our community. Council Bluffs Savings Bank, hometown banking the way it used to be.